So. Well, all of you who came from other countries than the Netherlands, today we had a wonderful sun shining outside and we are keeping you inside. So we really, really, really feel very guilty. But I'm sure, and that's the promise, that after the plenary and the wrap-up, we will have a drink outside. So that's really the reward. But it will only be open at the end after the plenary. Of course, we have the plenary discussion here, but we have agreed with the workshop chairs that we will have a presentation from all the workshops, 3 minutes each, in which you will be sharing with us, the core conclusion of the workshop, and also if there are some calls for action, because this is a real huge opportunity for us being here together. And as, I don't know if it was Aina or Sabina has said, we are also having, I think it was you, Anya, a network. That's really the idea. So there were ideas also from the public who came to me and they said, oh, please, can we have the possibility to share our email address that people must say we have no objection to, or things like that, that at least the persons who are here know how to meet each other. So there are many ideas coming up, but before we go to the calls to action in general, and also for the opportunity for you all to ask very strong and pertinent questions to the present person at the plenary, I would like the working group chairs to come forward, 3 minutes per person, and please, I'll start with you, Sofia.
Thank you very much. So I was chairing the first panel on queer invisibilities. Our focus was mainly gender identity and expression asylum claims, and empirical material was was from Denmark and Italy. So our main conclusion, if I can say so, was that in gender identity asylum claims, the main challenges faced by non-binary, gendered fluid, and in general gender non-conforming applicants. So, yes, in general, applicants that do not conform with this idea of binary gender expression. Let me think, I'm a bit tired. So, what else we said?
Were there striking?
Yes. So, what was also highlighted is that although UNHCR guidelines do not reject the idea of non-linearity and fluidity in terms of, in queer embodiments and expressions, although expectations such as gender-affirming medical care and an early coming out are expected from applicants, and in general, binarism is the marker against which we could say applicants' credibility is being measured. So regarding improvements and possible suggestions, I think we agreed that we cannot suggest a single certain solution, but if we aim towards a more inclusive, let's say, asylum system, then we should put more focus on expanding and not proliferating gender identities. So creating and constructing new identities wouldn't solve the problem. And as mentioned, MXM decision from UK courts could be an example towards this direction. Yeah, so I think that we concluded that, in general, a more fluid approach on queerness and trying to lose the limits and the boundaries of queer identities would help us to imagine and construct a fairer asylum system. I hope I made justice to our session. Yeah, and I summarized the main points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Just to keep in mind, all the workshops were registered, so we have enough possibilities to look them back and share them and maybe use them as a discussion with our own peer and groups in our work and others. Thank you very much. I forgot once before we started this group, but I was thinking how to do that. Just to have an idea, how many of you are from the academia? Actively. Okay, academia, okay. And are there people working with the government, like ministries? We are not going to bash you, don't worry. No, really. The idea is so that when we will be having call for actions, that we can say, what do you need, and things like that. Okay, 4, 5, 6, thank you. 7. And from NGOs? Okay, the majority, I think. And from grassroots organizations? Okay, thank you. Other group I haven't mentioned, you think certain lawyers? Oh, of course. Those, lawyers, barristers who are in the, okay. Immigration officers? Yeah, one? No. Yeah, oh yes. Very important. Human rights philanthropy.
Asylum seekers.
Asylum seekers. Yeah. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Thank you. Refugees. Okay. Thank you. Just to have an idea, because when we'll be talking about call for action, maybe that we can say, of course, we have different intersecting identities work, but it would be interesting to go. Thank you very much. So I would like the second group, Claire. Have I seen Claire? Oh, yes.
Hi. I will try and do justice to my 3 speakers. They were very good. So we looked at proving Sogiesk, and we had Ruz and Louisa, who first looked at the Dutch asylum system. Really interesting approach. So they interviewed people who weren't in the asylum process to see if their narratives could pass in an asylum interview. And they found that it would be very difficult, but also that obviously if you're in a welcoming environment, welcoming, that you're already in a safe-ish country, then it is easier. But it's also still difficult. So if you imagine you're coming from a hostile context, then having to share something so difficult in a hostile context that an asylum process is, then it's obviously going to be you're already at a massive disadvantage. Then we looked at the German context, I believe. I might be wrong. Yes, that's correct. And looked at how the issues of heteronormativity kind of worked its way through the sort of asylum process. Very interestingly, looking at where people were housed, but also the context of which you had to talk about your narrative. And obviously people who are living in asylum accommodation couldn't be out, as an example, but they also experienced queer hostility. I think the term was correct, yeah. That was used, and so it already shows the disadvantage people have who are living in these hostile spaces to try and prove an asylum claim. They're already on the back foot. And then the actual asylum interview itself was in a very busy space. You were often waiting hours, so by the time you actually got to present your narrative, you were already very tired, not feeling safe. There was actually issues of a person who was actually had a homophobic, transphobic assault when they were waiting for their asylum interview to happen. So obviously, that's not safe. So the idea was how might we look, for safe spaces when people have to present for an asylum interview in the first place. Yes, and also the use of security. So in the asylum context, there was lots of security. People weren't allowed to walk around freely. And so obviously that's, again, a very hostile space for someone having to recount something that's potentially very traumatic. So yeah, that was interesting. And then we had the UK context and looked at the intersection of religion and queerness and how there is a very homosecular an opinion of queer identity or queer subjectivity, and how there's an expectation that people will leave religion behind at their earliest opportunity when they come to a safe, I use the inverted commas, safe country to claim asylum. And so I think the basic conclusions that we came to was, one, our understanding of queerness that is in decision-making is very small, which we've all spoken about multiple times. Also, context and social factors really make an impact, so how safe people feel when they are in an asylum interview makes a massive impact. And also how high, ridiculously high, the barrier, the expectation is to present queerness. If you were in a safe country, then you might not even meet that kind of requirement. So that's something to think about. So yeah, hopefully I did.
Were there some calls?
It was just mainly that we need to rethink our kind of understandings of queerness.
Yeah, that's very important. Thank you very much, Claire. The next person is Sonia Lenigan.
Hi, everyone. So my panel was on challenging stereotypes, and I would say that the need for and the importance of training was an overarching theme that was mentioned in all of the papers. Alex spoke specifically about the need for cultural competency training and the positive impact that this has had in other sectors and how that could be moved across and used in the asylum sector. We also had a reminder from one of our audience members about the importance of considering where we're getting our understanding of what is happening in other countries. So, for example, some country information is sourced from embassies, which is not very useful given they often work closely with governments. So it's important to speak to NGOs who actually work with the communities. I found it striking when Simona explained that here in the Netherlands, they have guidance for assessing credibility of LGBTI applications, but then intersex people are not actually mentioned in the guidance. And that's a really good example of the lack of visibility that intersex people have within the system. From Alex, we also had a useful reminder of the role that lawyers can play in reinforcing those systems, for example, by expecting an emotional journey from clients, because the lawyers know that that is what the decision makers expect, whereas actually lawyers should be better at challenging this. I also found Alexandra's presentation really interesting. She spoke to the decision makers for her paper, two of whom are queer, which I found really interesting as well, to see how they seem to struggle with the expectations that come with using those models, because obviously it's incompatible with how a lot of queer people experience life. So there's lots to think about, and I do recommend reading all three of those papers. I actually took a little action point for myself from all of this, based on what Alex said, because one of the places that I work is an organization that provides online materials and training for lawyers. So I am looking at developing a training course that really makes clear that we should not be working within this system of models, and that instead we should be working to resist and challenge it. And I've already been in touch with a barrister who's agreed to work with me on this, so it's going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sonia. Next is Lisa Menke.
Hi. So I chaired the session about child suggest claims, as well as a session by let me check, I'm sorry, my notes. By Sherilyn Jordan on their approach in Canada. What Elias and Alexandra talked about is Elias specifically talked about how to apply a child's right perspective and that it should be applied in children's SOGESC cases, because what often happens is when you have a child claimant is that you will either be perceived as a child and therefore you cannot be queer, or you will be perceived as queer, which automatically seems to negate your childness, while of course that should not be happening, because then you're not recognizing both the right to an identity and also the protection as a child. So the recommendation here was to very seriously look at how to apply the right of the child to be heard, but also the right to identity, and combine those in children's SOGESC claims, and that those also need to be included in guidelines for the UNHCR as well. And then Alexandra did research in the Swedish context, and she looked at several cases, 9 interviews and 29 cases on young people and their SOGESC claims. Only one of the people in the sample was actually underage, but still it's important to apply a child's rights approach, because for young people, so much of the things that would be true for children are also still true. And what I found particularly interesting in Alexandra's talk is the fact that she very strongly mentioned that if you are looking at a system, like just training your decision makers is not enough, because if the system is broken, you're not actually going to fix anything by training people, because new people will still have the same biases that exist already. And then in the case of Sherinay's case in Canada, they developed a training for not only decision makers, but also for lawyers and for NGOs. And in this training, they looked very seriously at the stereotypes that we know by now. So for example, the Western model of the coming out model, as well as such as the connection that you should go out and have a community immediately, as well as that you should have that openness when you come to a safer country, and also the considerations of taking the psychological effects into account. And actually by combining and training all 3 of those groups, they saw that actually the process of asylum determination improved drastically. So that was very interesting to see as well. The call to action was basically for the first 2 sessions to apply a child's rights approach to children's SOGESC or young people's SOGESC claims. And the recommendation by the Canadian case was to try and apply these kinds of trainings more broadly, so that it worked in Canada, so it might work anywhere else as well. That's it, I think.
Thank you very much. Maarten?
Thank you. My name is Maarten Den Heijer. I chaired the second session after lunch on challenging stereotypes with wonderful papers by Million, Ifi, Davide, and Ravia. I had the pleasure to read them because I was chair, but I heard there will be a book, so please buy the book or receive the book for free and read the articles with great recommendation. I cannot go into them. And the papers were all about the role of stereotyping, and more broadly, I would say, ignorance in credibility assessments from experiences in the United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Italy. I have 2 takeaways, and one is more personal, and that is that we perhaps should stop saying that stereotyping is a bad thing, because stereotyping, like migration, is part of human nature. It's what we all do, and it's not our aim to root it out or to fight it, or perhaps fight it, but to be aware of it and to find ways to deal with it. And another takeaway is that Obviously, stereotyping has to do with ignorance, but that is a very complex and multi-layered phenomenon. It is about ignorance often of straight persons about other persons, LGBTI persons. It's perhaps much more about ignorance of non-Western cultures. And often what one sees, and it were some very examples in the paper of Million, that asylum seekers themselves have all sorts of stereotypes. So we have to root it out or try to find it on all those fronts. And I obviously training was an important recommendation, but also how can we in the world train ourselves to be aware of all those different cultures and stereotyping. But let's start. I think the most important action point is to have more conferences like this.
Thank you. Karen.
Yes, my name is Karen Geertsma and I chaired the panel on means of proof. So it was a second panel on rules of evidence, I would say. I also was in the morning session on proving Sogiesk. But in this panel we had 4 papers with beautiful research, with lots of interviews, rich data from the UK, Belgium and Finland. And also from different disciplines, I would say. Jess took us to the difficult topic of the increased influence of digitized evidence in credibility assessment in general, but also in what it means for Sogiesk asylum claims, showing us interesting the role of photographs found on the phones, the role of emojis, reading emojis. I couldn't do it. And I think that she also talked about some important concepts, I think, when we talk about evidence, namely the cycle of rejectness and the escalation of proof. Then Hedayat took us to Finland and showed us more the legal psychology research into lots of files where she had access to. And I think that from that one I took, and I think that's a red line through all these 4 presentations, is the expectations of proof and also the expectations of performance. I think that presentation also made clear the importance of that we recognize type of questions in interviews. The open questions were used too little. There was a very low percentage. There were a lot of focused questions, so the W questions I learned, the what, where. But then still, and I think that's always a big worry in asylum cases, the unrecommended questions in which we read, maybe a stereotype, which is not bad in itself, but when it's posed in a question and when there's an expectation in there, it's worrying. Then I think the Belgium presentation made something clear, what's very apparent in a lot of the EU jurisdictions, and I think it also was clear that the UK after Brexit moved away from that, but that's the discussion on a particular social group and the requirement of having a fundamental characteristic and how the Belgian authorities make a difference between sexual action, sexual orientation, and this was well shown for all the Afghan men case files. Well, and then in the end, Pip made clear to us by analyzing a lot of also interviews in the UK, how housing affects also the negative credibility assessment. So the final, what was striking, I think, was the paradox of visibility versus invisibility. You have to be visible to prove your asylum claim, but have to be invisible for your own safety in the housing environment. It resulted in call for action. I think all four of you mentioned the word training, and I've heard it around here, and I think well, maybe that's on a personal note, I really think we should take it further than just coming to the conclusion that we need more training, but that we also need to talk more about how this training should take place. And there are already best practices, I hear. And I really want to challenge you to think more to the conclusion of the keynote speech on taking away from the discussion from the credibility towards the risk of persecution.
Thank you very much. Then, Alexandra. A more inclusive assessment.
Oh. Yes, that was why I got back. No, thank you. Because I didn't remember the name of the session, that's why I went back. So we had a very, very interesting session here in the afternoon. And just briefly, it was two of the papers that actually contained ready-to-implement tools for asylum authorities. So I really recommend the representatives of the authorities being here to take an extra good look at them. It was one toolbox for decision makers, and also reinventing of terminology. That was also very interesting. And we, from my session, I think I speak for everyone when I say that we encourage also UNHCR and EUAA to take a look at these tools, because we found them very interesting. I think everyone in my session did. Furthermore, we had a very interesting paper concerning how what was the discrepancy between the institution and the practice, and especially concerning intersectionality. And I recommend everyone also to read this paper. I recommend all of the papers, of course, but it was very interesting in how, because intersectionality have become such a tool. I mean, it went from a theory to a tool, and this paper really takes it back to what it was from the beginning, and maybe it has become, as it became a tool, a little bit watered out. How do you say it? Yeah, oversimplified. So can we take it back to the roots? Should we do that? Very, very interesting. We also had experiences kindly shared from us from an NGO in Austria about their experience of community-based support and how powerful that actually can be, and their views on how to combat stereotypes and how they actually helped over 1,000 members in their organization to go through the asylum process in a more fair way. So a big thank you to everyone in my session. We had also a lot of questions, and I don't make it any justice now, just briefly summarizing. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. You were at least you stimulated us to really read all the papers, the tools and the good practices. So that's a call to action as well. So, Tineke.
How's everyone? Look at the faces. So I will try to keep it short. We had two topics in my workshop. The first workshop topic was for Strommeling. Let me make it short. A case of Zee, a trans asylum claim by Willemijn. And Zee was there, and also the lawyer, I forgot the name, sorry. Ingrid? Inge. I was close. Okay. And actually what I would say is the conclusion is that when you look at the case, that it was very much looked at from a Western frame of sexual orientation and gender identity. It's always said it's keeping being repeated, not cultural sensitive, and also a lack of knowledge and sensibility of the people who looked at the case of, say, from IND. And also, for me, what was really striking is that there was a wrong translation by the how you call it, the talk? The translator. So that's something I was thinking, how is this possible that most of it that is being translated and that was not correct? There were also a lot of lack of knowledge about transition-related topics. And I would say that one of the conclusions is that the guidelines, also those from the UNHCR, should be adjusted or revised, and also the Dutch guidelines. And one of the things I took with me, that there is a call for more safety in the AZC's, especially for trans persons, because based off the country where they come from, it might be not that safe for them. So that was one. Sorry if I lost. Yes. The second one was a workshop about self-organization and knowledge exchange and peer-to-peer support. My compliments for the two presentators, because they had a short time to and they live in two different countries to make this a very good workshop. We talked about the pros and cons about peer support. One of the pros is, yes, it's empowerment. It is empowering. It's a liberation. But also what I liked is that was said that actually, you move from being a data to being an expert, and that you can meet with each other and can share that you're a person and not a number. One of the counts of the peer-to-peer support, some of them could be a fear for segregation, gatekeepers. There could also be racism and discrimination within the group, and which can be a pro, but also a con, the interpersonal relations. Yes, so sometimes you might not feel safe enough. Actually, the call was that there is a need for more safe spaces. So that's my summary of it.
It was a very rich harvest, I can say. Very layered, very important. And what also was important, that it was really your keynote speech, Professor Ferreira, and also what you said, and all the presentation are really reflected, but given more depth with all the points. So now I come to you as the final plenary talk, and then I will give also the floor a possibility to ask you questions, because they didn't get the possibility to ask questions in the morning when you did your presentations. So I would like to start with you, Professor Ferreira. When you listen and you have been also participating in different groups, is there something you recognize or which is giving depth to the presentation you had, or was it something new you hadn't considered before?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I think what connected many of the presentations, by the way, I can sometimes go through conferences without taking a single note, which usually means I didn't find anything very interesting. But I wrote loads today, which means I did find this conference really, really interesting, and I learned a lot. And I think that's a testament to the wonderful quality of all the presentations. But going back to your question, I know we can think very ambitiously, and I know we can go for blue sky thinking, you know, no borders, let's revolutionize the system, let's abolish the asylum system, and so on and so on. And that's all fair game. I think it's good. We need that. But also, we need to do something in the meantime. And in the meantime, let's be a bit pragmatic, and we need to do something for the people who need and are entitled to international protection and need to see their rights protected and their needs addressed. So in that respect, I think something that linked all or most of the presentations and that struck me a lot is training again. I know it's already been mentioned several times now, and it might not be the solution for everything, but I think it's what we need to start with, at least for now, when we can't do much more. But I think
can I challenge you there?
Yes.
Because I don't know, one of the presentation was that trainings in itself, as long as the system remains the same,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, this season now, you bring some flowers and then the season is finished and you throw them away and you bring new ones.
Yeah.
So how do you make something sustainable in which is also challenging the system? How can training or other instruments be more useful then?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'd like to say about that is that, of course, it's not the only solution. It's one part. It's part of a multi-strategy. But what struck me throughout these presentations, and the reason why I stuck to training as a theme, is because it's not the usual view of, okay, let's give them 1 day of training and that will sort it. Of course, it doesn't. It needs to be regular. It needs to be high quality. But what struck me is that it should be focusing on psychological knowledge, and that speaks to the presentations from Herayat Selim, and it speaks also to the PhD thesis of Rawaya Rifat, for example. It's clear that legal knowledge is not enough. It's clear that decision makers are dealing with such complex situations. They need to also understand a lot about trauma-informed decision-making, and procedures need to be adapted to that legal knowledge, psychological knowledge. But what also struck me is that even legal knowledge is not adequate in many decision makers. So that came from Andrea's comment previously today, when it was clear that decision makers are taking these decisions without even having the basic legal knowledge about what is a particular social group, what is a risk of persecution, what needs to be considered under each heading, and so on. So training also needs to be very much improved in terms of legal training. And the UK is an obvious case. You know, I was really amazed when I found out that the government is just picking high school graduates and letting them decide on people's lives. I couldn't believe this was actually the case, and it is. So it's obviously not enough.
I'm afraid it's not the only country in Europe doing that.
All right, yeah. And then, of course, the third aspect of the training is decision makers need to have a much better knowledge in terms of sex, sexuality, and gender identity. They are dealing with these cases sometimes for the first time. They don't know what these things are about. They've had a straight, heterosexual, heteronormative existence, and they don't know exactly what they are dealing with. So even in good faith, they are not doing justice to the cases. So I think we're talking about training, and training is not enough, but it's so basic that we really need to keep insisting on this in all its range and quality and regularity.
Thank you very much. And now I'll come to you, Adriana. As I said before, a couple of times there was reference also to the UNHCR, to the guideline, of course, but also on on child SOGESC applications. So what do you see, or what have you heard in general, which is for you something you can take with you, and a light call to action?
Thank you so much. Well, I want to start thanking, of course, the Striking Sirens for putting all this together and bringing so many experts from so many countries here, and the quality as well of the research that was presented was excellent. From my perspective, what I really take with me is the intersectionality, because it's something that was discussed during the workshop on child SOGESC claims, and of course it's repeated continuously throughout the different conferences, the reference or the use of stereotypes, the poor quality decision making often comes from this misconception of what we speak to hear from persons of diverse SOGESC when they are retelling their account and their experiences. And at the end of the day, what the most important thing is that we look at the person in front of us individually, as an individual. Each person is different, and we cannot expect a single answer, and I think this is something that has been repeated multiple times today. But this goes not just to their gender identity and their sexual orientation, it goes deeper to the person who they are. When Alexandra was telling us about her work with children and youth as well, and Ilias as well, the work with children, is not only that they are not taking into consideration this integral part of their identity, which is being children, being youth. This is not being considered when the analysis is being conducted, when credibility is being established. And I think I might not be, I might become very unpopular saying this, but assessing credibility is an integral part of the RSD process, and we cannot shy away from it. We have to do it, but we have to do it in a way that we do it as objectively as possible. Through a methodological approach, we aim at removing the objectivity that we have as individuals. We all have thoughts, we have opinions, and we have biases that we need to acknowledge. We need to be aware of them, and we need to be ready to tackle them as well when we are conducting RSD procedures. And I think this is something that is very important, to think that when we are assessing credibility, it's just one part, one aspect of the process of establishing the material facts of the asylum claim. So we really need to take a step back, and it's not just credibility, it's really trying to figure out who is the person in front of us and what are the elements that we're going to consider to determine whether this person meets the refugee criteria or not. And this is also another part of the analysis. So I think, again, this takes...
Is there something UNHCR can use already? Because sometimes, as you say, being part of a very bureaucratic organization, being part of the UN system, which it's a global and things like that, are there quick wins you can already take from what you have heard on these cases? Because there was the round table a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I think. So what can be done then for all these insights to be of use for the UNHCR in the expectation of this guideline to be revised?
Well, this is what I wanted to go next. Thinking about the intersectionality, it's not just about updating the GIBS number 9, it's really to take a look at all the guidelines as a whole, and what is their impact as well? Are they fit for purpose? And how are we going to move forward with this? Unfortunately, I cannot share more about the ongoing process. But what I can tell you that we are continuously working on is engaging with national counterparts to ensure that their systems are adapted, that there are fair and efficient systems that function with integrity. And I know this is easier said than done, but we really are trying to engage with them and ensure that the analysis is done in line with our standards as well. We have out there the Introduction to RSD e-learning, which is publicly available as well. on a platform called Disaster Ready. And in this training, even though it has been developed for RSD procedures under UNHCR's mandate, is where we also present our approach to establishing material facts of asylum refugee claims. And this is source material that we refer to often in our work with national counterparts, when putting trainings together, seminars and so on, and trying to really bring this objectivity to the credibility analysis, which is not an easy task, but we're working on it.
Work in progress. Okay. Andrea, you have been listening and participating in all the work. So is there something from as being part of the Striking Sirens, but also from your work, that you are taking with you of this conference, or what was striking maybe?
Yes, I definitely think so. And I think one thing that this conference has done is given me optimism, because if there are so many intelligent, resourceful, smart people out there working on this, then there should be hope for progress. But I also think that I think one thing that we need to be aware of, and it kind of goes back to what Nuno was talking about, is that we need to work with the very flawed system that we have. But that also means that we need to keep in mind that the system is flawed, which means that although we want solutions, we need to be prepared for the fact that when we find solutions, there will be ways for the system to come back. And I think that is one main takeaway that we need to be aware of. And you can see this in the development of SOGIES claims. We had the discretion requirement, we thought we won, and then we got the credibility issues turning up. And I think once we gain headway on doing something with the credibility assessment, for example, focusing then more on country of origin information and what do you fear, we will see the same process happening again. And this comes out of the broader context that refugee law works within. So I think that one thing that we all need to sort of prepare ourselves for, and maybe support each other in sort of standing in and being patient with, is that as many multifaceted obstacles as turns up, we need to prepare a new solution. And we need to be prepared to continue to do that. And that also means that while we are working specifically on SOGIES claims, we also need to look for ways to improve refugee law in general. If we can do those things at the same time, then over time perhaps we can actually make some headway into the system, I think.
It's a huge task. Thank you very much. Aina, can I ask the same question to you? Because you were very active in different groups, and also about how is this what does it mean for you, what you have heard, and how this is going to be translated in certain ways in the work you do individually, but also as part of the Striking Sirens?
Thank you for the question. And I think I will say it again, that just the fact that we are so many people here, I think we didn't expect it to become as huge as it did when we first started talking about that. What are we going to do? We should arrange maybe a conference, and I had no idea. And over the summer, we just kept seeing more and more people. And just now, Sabine told me that, yeah, this week, more and more people from Sweden were, registering to the online participation. So, I mean, already this is a lot to take in, and I'm so happy about that. Yes, it's depressing because we kind of have the same conclusions, but we agree on that. So I think we agree on that we have a system that is sort of broken. But we also are very focused, like today, on finding solutions. And we have heard so many panels, and we have seen papers and suggestions and toolboxes. And, so it's very, for me, I'm already more positively surprised than I thought I would be. And also when I sit here, I really think a lot about that. It's what Adriana is saying, that yeah, it might take time. I think that is expected, but there is something happening. So there are already internationally things happening, and I would say that the discussions we have today, the network we are hopefully going to, establish, is also an international collaboration, and so that is something that will happen and continue. And then I also, as I sit here, I start thinking about that, yeah, like what Adriana said, that if there are cases nationally that we think that maybe UNHCR can intervene in, and that is something we also know from Sweden, where we have contact with the regional UNHCR representatives. And that's something that I think all of us should think about, as well as taking cases to international instances like CAT. I mean, such things, it's what we already do, but I feel like now we have more, in Swedish we say more on our feet. I'm also a bit tired right now, but we have like more, we know that we have each other, there is research, and we are already sitting on a mountain of like unpublished research, so there is a lot of hope. So I just take with me that there are international work already being done by the UNHCR, even if it takes time. We have international research, we have collaborations, and nationally, for countries like Sweden, where I from RFSL and RFSL Youth, we already have a dialogue with the Swedish Migration Agency and have had it for years. So that's also something that I take with me, that we need to continue and see if we are going to have trainings, how can we develop them, how can they improve, and then of course changing the national case law. I'm also thinking about the Migration Court of Appeal in Sweden, where we have these precedents from 11 years ago now. I mean, such things need to change, because they really speaking of this like checklist of things to ask and answers to expect from applicants, like such things we need to be taking to that Court of Appeal again as lawyers or NGOs. So, yeah.
Strategic litigation is and remains an important, and also a way of amicus interventions as well. And as you said, maybe asking the UNHCR to intervene in cases, and maybe, for example, like NHRIs, they are organized on the European level, or ECINET, like the equality bodies, or others, in which really using the instruments we have more strategically, that would be a point to take, and then doing the rest of the work which was there. Thank you. Sabina, come to you. What does all this, what we have heard, mean for striking silence, but also for the Dutch reality?
The Dutch reality, well, I would like to say that I as usual, I agree with everything Andrea and Aino said. That's important to say, I think, and Nuno as well. I must say I'm a bit disappointed in Adriana. I don't want to spoil the party, but I keep thinking like the guidelines, which are a very important document worldwide. I think there are many countries who actively use these guidelines. Need to be urgently revised since 3 years already, and I think, it can maybe take 5 or 10 or more years even for this will actually happen. I understand, of course, that you are not the boss on this.
Certainly not.
But well, I would like to express this slight disappointment. Although, of course, interventions in cases sounds very good, but it's not the same, I would think. Well, and anyway, but maybe I said it later. I don't know. I was saying some practical things, like that. The whole conference is recorded, and the idea is that you can see everything that you missed afterwards. We maybe first have to edit it and cut out the questions, or I don't know what. But the idea is that we can share the link of the conference later, so that you can, or see your own session again to see, well, to repeat it. And of course, Martin said there will be a book, and buy this book. That's a bit too positive, I think. I mean, the idea, originally we thought maybe to publish all papers online before the conference. We decided not to do that. So you must be very curious to see all these lovely papers. But what we want to do, we would like to publish them, or all of them, or part of them, but we don't know yet whether this will be a book or an online publication or whatever. We're going to talk about it. So buy this book is not yet a
when
reality.
it comes, buy it. Thank you. But I have promised the floor I would give you space and time. So we have more or less half an hour-ish to have a possibility to ask the panelists here. Is there someone who can help me with a mic so that I don't have to run everywhere? Yes, thank you. Sophia, you may, that's the reward of asking the question.
No, you keep your mic, you keep your mic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you, Professor Ferreira. So you started saying when answering Domenica's question that an abolitionist, revolutionary, or more radical perspective would be somehow unrealistic or utopian, or not grounded into practice or corresponding maybe to the problems that we face now. And this made me think of Butler, who I think was widely cited in this conference, who says that it's exactly what remains unrealistic and maybe we could say poetic or unfinished about queerness, which is exactly its transformative promise and what let us imagine maybe a different world order beyond like normative violence and an instrumentalistic logic. So my question would be if you think that an abolitionist perspective and simultaneously, let's say, a more reformist approach on which we are discussing now are contradictory, or whether we can have them both. Yeah.
Well, Professor Ferreira,
do you want to collect questions,
no,
or shall I answer?
This first, and then we'll see you.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely, I think it should be a cumulative approach. In this case, I'm in favor of the cumulative approach. The end aim can be an abolitionist approach. It can be a no-border movement, and we can be in favor of a radically different protection system. What I said is that in the meantime, we need to do something. And unfortunately, no matter how radical we are, we won't see that change anytime soon, for our great disappointment. But I think if we are realistic and see the current political environment, there's no way we're walking towards a no-border world. So in the meantime, there are thousands, if not millions of people out there who need to be protected and are entitled to protection. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to do something more practical about it. And if I might take the opportunity now, something that I forgot to mention and that I wanted to mention is that I think when we think about recommendations and practical measures and so on, we also need to be a bit strategic how we think about them, in the sense that what is in these for the stakeholders. So, of course, for us as activists and academics and so on, it's clear that these things should be implemented because they would make for a fairer system. But I think we also need to try to think in terms of how the governments, the agencies, and so on think about these things, and what is it in it for them to implement our recommendations. And in this case, I think we need to think how we present these recommendations in a way that also seem beneficial for those stakeholders. So, for example, if we argue for more training or fairer procedures and so on, I think we need to explain how that is also beneficial, for example, in terms of reducing the backlogs in tribunals or making procedures faster and so on. So I think not only we need to be practical in this immediate moment, I think we also need to be strategic and present these things in a way that can be more convincing for stakeholders. Thanks.
I have a challenging point there. I really, even though I'm a chair, so I'll intervene now. Because sometimes when you are working with the system can suck you in. And especially when I see that in the Netherlands, when you are more or less providing service to the government, before you know that, you become dependent on the government. So not that you are silenced, but you, for your own survival, you will be part of the system. So it can be challenging, just to mention that as a warning, because we have seen that in many organizations in which then it can create certain censorship. And okay, I'll give the floor to the, yes.
Hi, Neil Grungrass. So as I've been sitting here today, I've developed an increasing sense of urgency around what we're doing and what we need to do. I was at the 2010 roundtable at UNHCR, where we first discussed the matter of LGBTI refugees. That's what we called the topic at the time. The governments of Belgium and Norway were there. I think those were the only two governments. UNHCR was aware of 3 LGBTI cases in its worldwide docket. Right? We are in a completely different situation today, right? With thousands of asylum seekers in most countries who are LGBTI. UNHCR probably has thousands of cases. But we need to be aware that we've actually sped forward in ways that we never imagined possible. It's been 14 years. But 14 years ago, we didn't have 10 elections in the highest LGBTI receiving nations in the world, which are turning on asylum. And to my mind, what that means is that we could be going down as fast as we went up. And we need to be very practical about what we do at this point, because we don't have a lot of time. So one question that I asked Sabine before, I don't mean to put this all on you, Sabine, but how can we take the power of this conference and the people who are here and actually operationalize it so that we actually see change and so that we implement changes? And the other question to Adriana, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, UNHCR, with all of its incredible progress, in 2014-15 adopted a model called DISH model, which at the time was all the rage and made a lot of very positive difference in adjudications, and now several years ago was found out to be actually counterproductive in many ways. How can UNHCR take the governments who have adopted that model and retrain them or take them in a different direction? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to react immediately, Sabine? No? I know. The mic is... we'll start with you, and then we can, the others will jump in. Sabine? How can this... I can try to say. Okay.
We don't have a finished answer. I think this
Let's
conference
start.
has to be a first step. But I do think that what we have seen is that our countries are all doing the same thing, right? And we've all been sitting on our own island trying to scream and be saying like, no, this is wrong. This is not the right way of doing it. We need to do something else. And I do think like if we can take something productive from this conference, it has to be to build those alliances that stops us from being alone. A single voice against a big bureaucratic administrative system, but that we can systemize our research and say, no, I'm not the one saying this. All of these researchers, all of these activists across Europe, across Canada, all of them are saying that this is an unfair procedure. So to draw on each other's knowledge has to be one way of doing it, I think, at least. In the same way that we see this reasoning spreading like a virus across our different countries, we also need to be a virus. Or a vaccine, perhaps. that we can share, that sort of use the same way of identifying similarities to actually fight back as well. To say, yeah, we see this across Europe, but we also have research showing that this is unfair, that it's legally unsound, that it's psychologically unsound, that all of these knowledges and all of these scientific disciplines, all of it teaches us that this is the wrong way of doing it.
But
so I think
the question
that's one
asked,
way.
I'm challenging you.
Yes.
So the question asked is, you know, on academic level, there are wonderful research, which for the converted, they know where to find you, and they can come. They can feel fed, and they say, "Oh, that's good and inspiring." But you are really working again in a system in which is very not willing to change. So, thinking of strategies, how do you do that? Publications or going somewhere, meeting? Because if you remain in your own safe circle, so safe bubble, know how to infiltrate, let's say, in ways in which you can make a difference or strategize, because the question was about strategies forward, because the strategies on litigation we have had on the previous round. So what are other possibilities? Striking silence, maybe others here in the group see as a possibility that sound and important research and findings and showing striking similarities, which having a huge impact, because what we forget here, it's affecting human beings' lives. We had a testimony this morning. There was a person of a working group later, but what the policy is doing is really re-traumatizing human beings who are there to be protected. So the urgency is there. So what are the possibilities, just to challenge you, that you see, okay, on litigation this, on policy this, or something? Do you see something, or can others in the group have ideas to really take steps? Yes? Sophie, there is a possibility for a suggestion.
This is by no means an innovative suggestion, but as we think about more innovative approaches of assessing credibility, I think officials really need to not lose sight of the level of conviction required in asylum cases. I mean, this was a recurring thought that I had while listening to the evaluation or requiring digital evidence, for example, or using credibility criteria in a very stringent way, is that are officials actually asking themselves, does this match the standard of proof or the level of conviction, which is a reasonable likelihood of facing persecution? So I think officials need to be reminded of that constantly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There is here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was actually thinking about the main question that was initially asked is about Evgeny Shtorn, about the action plans, and the action, and kind of thinking this way. I was thinking that one of the main things that, okay, trainings are good, but let's give to people with lived experience, deliver those training. Let's create opportunities for those people, because otherwise it will be, the white people who haven't had to apply for the visa in their lives, delivering trainings for white people who haven't had to apply for visa in their lives. And it is a perpetuation of this hierarchy of opportunities that someone is born, and it's no one's fault, but they are born with these opportunities, and others have to go through an absolute hell. And I think that, it's okay, but let's think outside of the box of our conformity. And let's also not ignore that we are now living in a very dangerous context. There is an absolute rise of far right within Europe with the anti-gender ideology, on the top of the agenda. And it's also something that threatens us. And we probably will have to, confront it from very different angles. And one of them, I think, it's when you were naming stakeholders that are in the room, there is one stakeholder that you haven't named, and I think maybe there is no, maybe there are, but there is no media here. And I think it's a very big problem, because we need media here. We need them here to spread the information, to make public aware of what is going on, and so people know, people read, people engage more, they change their perception, and it changes the whole ecosystem of this conversation. Because otherwise it's us experts, sharing all over again, we all know that. I want it to go further. And I think without journalists, we will never get through our bubble. And this is something that is very important. I think on a very like European level and national level, we have to go to the media and let them speak about it, because otherwise it will just remain invisible. And maybe think about much more things. I just don't want to take everyone's time. But yeah, thank you very much for this conference. I think it was so inspiring to see so many people, but it was also a little bit discouraging to not to see more people, you know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The man with the glasses there. No, the ones where you are. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
You'll come later. Yeah.
Okay, I am Hussein. I have a question to Adriana, because you also mentioned about you intervene as a UNHCR some cases, and also during my master also I saw in many case law examples that UNHCR involved. However, I didn't come across in the Netherlands maybe, and also I didn't see you, like I make an observation in 20 as I say here, but I didn't see UNHCR office in general. And I want to point out like reception conditions also important for credibility assessment, as she already pointed out. For example, it is not the only one, the example like the workshop, for example, because of their safety, to ensure their safety, some people, when they go to interview, for example, they cannot express their gender identity, whoever they are, which result in calling themselves as men and end up with a rejection. So when UNHCR comes to play, or when UNHCR involve the case after the rejection decisions, or what? Can you elaborate it?
Answer this question.
It's up to you, because there's also another question before, so
I want
it's
to
up
ask
to you.
First this one and then answer the first question. First this one.
First this one. Okay. So is the state's responsibility to provide protection. So UNHCR, it's involved in the asylum procedure. UNHCR conducts RSD under its mandate in places where the government does not have an asylum system, or where the system is not accessible or for certain populations. And so generally, you will not see UNHCR conducting RSD in Europe, North America, and so on. And does that answer your question?
Yeah, but
your first part of your question, right?
Yeah.
With regards to the reception conditions, you are absolutely right, and it is important that procedures are set in place for early identification of persons of diverse SOGIESC, and this is something that UNHCR advocates for from the onset, from the moment someone walks into our reception center to collect information on the asylum procedures. It's important that it is a welcoming environment, that people can feel that they can share their experience with them, with the national authorities in this case. And not only, this also takes me back to the point about training. Every single individual who is involved in the asylum process, from the guard who is standing at the door until the person who conducts the interviews, review the cases, needs to be sensible to the realities of LGBTIQ+ persons. And this is of the utmost importance. The environment as well in which reception is conducted, under which registration conditions are being carried out. It is also of the utmost importance to ensure that the person feels safe to disclose their gender diversity and sexual orientation. But this is also takes me back to the point of the fact that late disclosure should not be penalized. We can understand there are millions of reasons why someone will not feel ready to disclose their diverse SOGIESC at the moment of initial registration. And this might come up at any time during the process. Decision makers need to be aware of this. They need to know that at any point, a diverse SOGIESC asylum claim can come up, whether it is still in the interviewing process or at the appeal stage. The merits of this claim need to be looked in its entirety, and it should not be looked as a negative credibility indicator from the onset. It is the responsibility of the decision maker to explore the asylum claim as a whole.
Thank you. Would you like to answer the first question also posed to you?
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much for your question. And I think it's very interesting to hear this. UNHCR, since in 2015, actually, we rolled out the implementation of the peace model of interviewing. And it has been expanded. In 2015, we had the first pilot training, and since 2016, it's the interviewing model that we used in UNHCR and that we also encourage states to use in their interviewing in their asylum interviews. And so we do not use the DISH model in UNHCR, nor we suggest or encourage national systems to use it. I understand that the DISH model was developed under different circumstances, can I say, and it is my personal opinion, at least, that it is centered on negative perceptions of one's identity, and focusing on difference, shame, and stigma, and harm also comes with that great risk of re-traumatizing someone who has already gone through so much. For someone to come to terms to their diverse gender, their diverse SOGIESC, it takes a lot to process, a lot of self-discovery. And every person goes through a different journey. We cannot expect everyone to be able to describe eloquently their story of self-realization. And every person's experience is different. Even people coming from the same neighborhood, the same country, my experience will be completely different to the one next door. And we are more than the country we are coming from. We are also members of a community or a family unity as well. So even though in appearance, two individuals might have the same background, in reality it's completely different. And it is important that we consider this individuality in the interviewing models that we implement. And this is also the reason why UNHCR focuses so much on the peace model of interviewing when it comes to all our protection interventions. It's not just about asylum procedures, but in every single protection intervention, UNHCR staff members are trained to implement the peace model of interviewing. And it is also a model that we encourage state members to use. And when we conduct our trainings, internal trainings for UNHCR staff members, we also train extensively colleagues who work with national asylum systems, with government counterparts. We do not only train colleagues who are conducting interviews themselves, but also those who will advocate with governments for the implementation of adequate interviewing techniques. So we've certainly proposed the peace model of interviewing to be implemented.
Thank you. I think, Sabine, you want to react on it? And Aina too?
Okay, yeah. A little question. I have read, I think, about 100 times UNHCR endorses the DISH model. I see the UNHCR guidelines 2012, number 9. Do you now say my personal opinion, this is not my personal opinion? Do you say it's not true?
My personal opinion is that
but I mean, you didn't say it's not true that UNHCR endorses the DISH model when you read the guidelines number 9.
The guidelines number 9 present elements of the DISH model as thematic areas that could be explored during the interview. So it rather suggests that these are topics that could be addressed in the context of an interview, of an asylum interview. It certainly does not invite this to be used as a model for assessing credibility. And also, as it's also mentioned in the GIBS number 9, there's not one single answer that we can expect. So it is, I mean, it's a reality that there are concepts of the DISH model in the GIBS number 9. But this has been misinterpreted and misimplemented, I would say.
So UNHCR endorses the DISH model, you would say that's not true?
No, I mean, yes.
Yes, that's not true.
UNHCR does not endorse the DISH model.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There are Alessandra, and then you there, and then the three of you. So first, second, third.
Just a reflection what are the realistic next step? We have touched upon it already, but I want to highlight one of the speakers in my session that had the toolbox, and I invite you if you also want to say a few words about it, but briefly that also decision makers should be invited as actors and drivers of change and be encouraged and trust upon to be able to deliver. And I really resonate with this message because from my own experience as a decision maker, and I believe that it is really important, if we want to see any change being made, that we also put the trust in the decision makers. But also, I also encourage, and I want to highlight, as Aino said, that we have this dialogue with the Swedish Migration Agency, and I encourage more NGOs to actually take that contact. It sometimes requires a certain professionalization of civil society, which I'm not all for. I just want to make that clear. I think it's so super important to still have a grassroots movement in a way and have activism that is free from like the professional perspectives. But we, as lawyers in the civil society, see huge benefits of having this kind of dialogue alongside of other activities as well. It doesn't have to rule out being a progressive voice, as also was mentioned earlier. But this is something that I encourage our colleagues in other NGOs to do and demand of your government, but also of the national agencies. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, sure.
Thank you. I just wanted to add also and comment on what Neil Grungrass was saying earlier about what do we do now. But one thing that we also have done with Alexandra and our respective research is to obviously like address not only the Swedish migration authorities but also the government. And it did result in actually the Swedish government assigning, can I say that, having an investigation regarding the I would say rule of law in Sojiesk asylum cases, among other asylum cases. And this is going to, and where we were obviously interviewed and the research was taken in. And this is going to be now presented on 7th of October. And I'm not naive to think that every country's government is going to do something like that, obviously. But it's worth trying. And just like Alexandra said, we are in that kind of unique position of having a dialogue with the Swedish Migration Agency. So it's something, when we're talking about solutions, it's worth trying. And we will see what this report is going to show on the 7th of October. Hopefully something positive will come out of it. So that's also something just, yeah.
And I want to, Ignacio, what's your name, what you said, because what I'm seeing, and that was what Million said also this morning, is how can, the old credo, nothing about us without us. What you see sometimes is that the whole asylum process is happening with academia, not necessarily are people with a refugee background or experience, and then it becomes that there is a very bubblish discourse about people and not without. And what happens is that the way in which people are then remunerated, because refugees most of the time are doing things voluntarily. And so you always remain on the margin while it's your story being taken. So there is always this danger of racialization, of instrumentalization, and also how can you do this more inclusively in a way that in order to go fast, you think, let's do it because we speak the same language. So this is the challenging part, which was also raised in the other conference a couple of years ago. So that's why I'm bringing it in. It's very important, but it's as I said, I'm this senior person who has been part of the movement for more than 40 years. And what I see now is that because of the dismantling of grassroots organization financial basis in many countries, they are very absent. And when they come as testimonials and not really part of the power structure. So questioning this power remains, for me, as I'm a chair here, but important because I am seeing it again and again and again, and it's perpetuating. So because also Ignatius mentioned it, I think it's very important to be accountable to ourselves and each other. When we do this, it might go slower, it might be messy, but it is more truthful. So that's maybe, there is someone behind you asking for the floor, and then here, yeah, and there, okay.
Thank you all for the conference and wonderful input. What I wonder, if you look to a visionary point of view, how can you change the credibility assessment? And I heard that you can't overthrow the system, and Nuno says we have to work with this. And we have seen that there is a lot of investment by immigration services into credibility assessments, whereas I think that it should be more an implicit part, the credibility assessment of everything that a person experiences in their own environment. But when I hear Adriana, you say, you drove me a bit up the wall, and I thought, hey, Adriana is really grabbing onto this credibility assessment from the perspective of UNHCR, whereas I hear that we would want to change that. And then a second thing that I was wondering, how can this platform be given more authority so that we can challenge national immigration services? But because now in the Netherlands, I think there is a limit to us reaching the immigration service. They kind of reject the input, and that makes it hard to what you manage in Sweden. Actually, in the Netherlands, is at this moment is not possible, I think.
Thank you. I'll collect a couple of questions because we have now 20 minutes. So there is a question there, and there is a back there. So two persons, and then for yourself too. Okay, first two. As a carrier of a mic, you will have a little bit less privilege then.
Very multitasking. Thank you. Irene Manganini. I think I'm reaching a bit on Eugenio. It's not a question, it's a bit of a sharing of frustration, because that always happens in the conferences, which I think it's amazing talking, but it's the word bubble kind of, struck me, because we at the workshop talked about being among peers, and being in peers, it always makes you breathe and be like, okay, I know, I don't have to say, and if I say credibility, SOGIES credibility, you all know what I'm talking about, But there's an increasing frustration. This might be a very, perhaps, Southern European perspective, because, even, I'm hearing a lot of very sophisticated Northern countries' approaches to, how, I don't know, credibility. Somebody said 5 hours. I think you had 5 hours interview, you said at some point, over 5 hours. What I'm seeing, and there's a bit this north and south, and that's a simplification of resources, right? So what I'm seeing and even more with the UPAC, we are running against time in the sense that the whole asylum system has enormous backlog and is not being allowed the privilege of time. So where I totally share that, that we should absolutely delve into the depth of these discussions. What I'm seeing in my own work is that, decision makers who are not necessarily these evil, queer-phobic bureaucrats, but who are maybe genuinely actually want to, play along, do not even have time to pee, at least. And this is going to be way, way worse when the pact is going to come. So it's going to come into play. So I don't have a question. It's more, I feel like certain things need to be addressed. I understand the practicality, I understand being strategic, but there is a level of political activism that I would really want to see in these kind of circles, especially from those who have a voice. Because, for example, and I'm sorry, Adriana, I worked for UNHCR as well. It was a great time, but UNHCR did endorse the UPAC. When do we stop talking to, people? there is a level of compliance that we really, I think, should not cross, because then we can talk about, I don't know, assessing non-binary claims, which is my entire PhD, so of course I want to talk about it, but then at some point, I mean, the person who comes from a non-binary person coming from a safe country of origin won't even get, I mean, will be deported in 3 days, because the vulnerability assessment will happen at the border, and at the border, there's no way to even, it's a 10 minutes checklist. You're not disabled, you're not a woman, but you're not vulnerable, you know? So like, it's more of a frustration of like, I understand why we spend all the time talking about it, but I feel like we should also, I feel like by now, like solidarity should really be in the section for real. Like, we cannot be asylum lawyers, academics, all of that, that work on queer issues without going to detention centers and saying that that's not okay. You know, like all of this that Eugenia was saying, I think I need this in the discourse.
Thank you. Can you go and ask and then it's after that, it's you, Sophia, because I have really kept you on the line.
Hi, I'm Noam. So I am currently an independent researcher. I'm a former UNHCR staff member. And I have a question for Andrea. So what you said
Adriana
about...
or Andrea?
Andrea. Andrea from Norway. No, but it really resonated with me, and this is actually something that I also reflected on in the paper that I wrote for this event, and that is the fact that, so we have seen a lot of positive developments when it comes to the protection of SOGIES claims in the past decade, right? But there are still challenges there, and as you rightly pointed out, so we are currently looking at the credibility assessments. Before, we were maybe looking at something else, and then we overcome that hurdle, and now we're looking at the credibility assessments. And once we overcome that, what will there be, right? And you suggested, let us focus on more improving refugee law. And I really don't want to, I don't dare to challenge you on that, but I think, yes, absolutely. But I think something that I was very much concerned about in my paper is more like, actually, yes, how do we improve refugee law? But how do we close the gap between the theory of law and the practice of law, right? And I think, so basically what I did, again, I don't suggest at all that I have the answers to this, but I actually want to hear your opinions. But basically what I did is that, so I looked at 3 kind of core ideas that, again, based on my own experience with UNHCR and with international organizations. So I looked at intersectionality, that is very much being kind of, very much part of the kind of institutional narrative of how to approach the claims, right? So looking at that, and seeing where does it come from, and what happens. So at some point, it came out of kind of black feminists in the US, right? From a political movement being a very radical kind of concept and coming from themselves based on their own experiences. And somewhere along the way, it turned into this kind of institutional tool that we use to kind of design programs. And we, you know, there's a tick box. Here we have an intersex person. So I wanted to look at that gap, what happened, and I used, I explored epistemic violence and a little bit how the concept became distorted at some point. And then I also wanted to look at this, another kind of emerging principle within international humanitarian organizations, which is the centering of the refugee experience, right? So we hear that a lot. We need to center the lived experiences. We need to promote more inclusion and participation. I fully agree. I think it's, I really welcome that kind of progress, but I also wanted to take it a step further. It's like, how do we, and I think this goes back very much to your point, how can we also ensure that we don't just extract information or knowledge from people? How do we also make them into producers of knowledge and intellectual agents, which I think they have a right to be. And I looked specifically at like participatory action research, and then also looking a little bit at autoethnography. Just as an example, it's kind of, these are actually tools that are very much marginalized, or methodologies that are very much marginalized within the academic world, but how can we actually get them out there and also invite people with lived experiences to actually become agents. And lastly, I wanted to look at the institutions, right? So I also wanted to see how can we close the gap between an institutional discourse and institutional practice. So I think that becomes a bit lost sometimes. I think, so again, coming back to my own experiences, I think, so I connected a little bit to like institutional discourse around LGBTIQ plus staff members and the DEI kind of policies around that, and how, what are the shared, are there, I believe that there are, I think there are a lot of similarities between the challenges that we are seeing within DEI, within an institution, and actually the protection of LGBTIQ plus refugees. I'm not saying, I'm not equating the two,
Can I ask
but I'm
you
saying...
to wrap up?
So, I want to ask you, because I'm really interested to hear...
these 3 points.
What do you... No, not necessarily on my point. I just wanted to share them. I want to hear you. Like, how do we ensure that we actually make a more... like structural change rather than just kind of overcoming a new obstacle?
Thank you very much. I will ask Sofito for the last question because you've been raising your hands, and then it's time to wrap up. Sophia, you wanted to ask a question yourself.
Yes, it's more of a short comment, not a question, but, and I'm thinking out loud now regarding what you, Evgeny, said, and I think many of you mentioned about including people with lived experience in the process, which I completely understand from where it comes, but I think that this needs to be accompanied with a political will to change the system, because otherwise I think it will end up to just a tokenistic approach, and I don't remember the name, I'm trying to remember that it was like a black scholar who wrote that black people in high positions won't help us to fight racism and won't change anything. So, yeah, just as a comment, it's not the question.
Thank you. I would like the panel to ask, first of all, the first question about how to use this platform more, and the other questions, and then there was a question for you, Andrea. So, do you remember that question?
No, can I only say we have 5 minutes before we start to drink?
Exactly.
Sorry, sorry, people.
So that's also the last question being asked.
And then we have an hour to drink, then it's finished.
Yes, exactly.
So we cannot postpone it. And my practical thing is that we for building a network, we thought of start to make a mailing list. And maybe the most practical thing is to write a mail to all of you. We have all your email addresses, and ask if you want to be on that mailing list.
Yeah, good.
And of course, thank you all for coming. It's really inspiring.
So that's the solution for the request on the platform. So we start with a network and a mailing list. So that's the answer. Because there was another question in that, it was about the credibility issues. Is that what you wanted to answer, or can we skip and give Andrea the floor? Exactly. A visionary view on where to go to the credibility question, which we are challenged now. Is there someone who can give in 2 minutes? To start with. 1 minute. No? During the drink, we'll get the visionary. And then...
I will definitely pass the toolbox to the Dutch IND. I don't think we talk to the Dutch minister at this moment, but at IND maybe we can send them the toolbox paper, because I like it very much.
Okay, good. So that's a promise. Andrea, so that the question asked was really a very deep question. So can you say...
I'm not sure if I can answer very quickly. One thing I can say is I don't think I assume I have the answer, and I think I equally assume that you might. And that goes for everyone in this room. So it's easy to sit here and pick apart the difficulties, and it's easy it's not as easy. But it's also easier than solving the visionary problems to make pragmatic and strategic solutions. We need to pick apart the problems. We need pragmatic, strategic solutions, and then the final tier, which is the one that will make the big impact in the long run, changing the system, is of course the most difficult thing to do. And I think we have so much potential in concepts such as intersectionality, participatory research, and I value so highly everyone who reminds us who this is about. Like, how do we include the people that this actually concerns? But I think from my very legalistic perspective, mostly I feel like I'm chiming the bell, saying the same thing over and over again, which is we need to make sure that we don't fall in love with simplistic solutions, with the pragmatic and the strategic solutions alone, because they will only take us so far. So for the other solutions, we need to build much longer and bigger alliances that needs to rely on political change and need to rely on change in a much bigger and deeper and more fundamental change, where we look at the system we have, we look at where it came from, like the right to determine who enters our countries, our states, and we need to change more fundamental aspects of that. And that's the long run, and that's going to be the tiring run. But at least we're in it together, so I'm happy about that.
Thank you. So you have had your last word, so I'm asking Aino, Nuon, and Sabine, and for the last word. Shall I start with you, Aino?
I'm not going to say anything much. I just really leave here with more positive thoughts than I thought I would. We are so many persons from so many different countries. We have people with lived experience. We have people from different professional fields. I mean, this is already a huge step. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Nuno Ferreira?
I guess my last word would be, it may feel frustrating and it may feel like we are buying into the system, but I think if we want some improvements sometime soon, we do need, and perhaps a bit in line with what Eugenie was saying, we do need to get a message out there and get out of our bubble. And for that, we need to talk to members of the parliament, we need to talk to ministers, we need to talk to decision makers, we need to talk to journalists. And final thing is that usually the stakeholders like quantitative research. They like figures, journalists especially. To grab their attention, they need figures. And in this respect, I was really impressed with the presentation by Asta Jariner and Maya Hertz. I think it was really sophisticated. I think it was a hint to the type of research we need to start doing. I'm talking about myself as well. I tend to only do qualitative, and I think quantitative tends to impress journalists and impress decision makers and impress state actors, and perhaps that's where we need to go if we want to change the system to some extent in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sabine, not yet you. Adriana, you are the last one. Adriana.
From my side, I learned a lot from each one of you, and I think I also got a very rare exposure to state practice. It's something that we always try to engage with our colleagues in the field and learn more about what is really happening, and seeing it gather in all these wonderful pieces of research actually has been an eye-opener for me. And I hope to continue collaborating with all of you and the Striking Sirens, and continue working together to take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Andrea, you have already had your last word, I said, but is there something you want to say? No? Okay. Sabine, so this is the last word to close this, this conference.
It's already 1 minute.
Yes, exactly. We are so sharp. That's why I say.
So I want to thank you all for coming. You have been very inspiring. And I was the coordinator, but of course there are many people from COC who helped me. And I want to just say that this was first and foremost Jessica. Then it was Lisa, Lucas, Tuna, Tineke, Ren, Jamie, Loes, Riz, and Mart. So that was what I was.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for our guest speakers. Adriana, thank you very much for being here. And there was a lot of fire towards you, but really you stand. Professor Nuon Ferreira, thank you very much for your very inspiring call for actions and many things. I would like to invite the striking sirens here in the front to really thank them for all the work and for organizing this very, very timely and inspiring conference. So Claire, where are you? And yes, please, if you can come. So the striking sirens, Sophia, if you can stand here to be thanked very much. Please give a warm round of applause for the striking sirens. Okay, yeah. You'll take the flowers. And I would like also to invite the speakers of the different working groups. Please, there is the table there of the Bali. There's also something as a token of gratitude for all your work. So, because it's many of you, you are invited to go to the table out there where you will receive your gift. Thank you very much, and I hope this will be a really step towards something further and bigger on Sogie's asylum claim and for the right of LGBTI refugees to really get the protection they need. Thank you very much, all of you.